intimacy can also benefit another of our parasites. The louse has a chance here to pass from the hair of one person to another's.
Until a few years ago, the most favorable age for lice was 7 years old, the age when a child becomes a bit more independent for washing. But nowadays, it's seen that adolescents and even adults catch lice much more easily. And selfies have a lot to do with this, because lice are excellent tightrope walkers and pass from one head to another.
Highly alarmed by the hordes of lice invading our hair, apparently the Russian Agency for Consumer Protection is thinking very seriously of demanding the banning of selfies. As elsewhere, in Russia, the lice attack.
Les poux attaquent et se multiplient.
Ouah, j'ai trouvé l'arme absolue. Et les poux sont tués.
To say there is an ultimate weapon against lice is untrue. Among insecticides, the last one which was revolutionary was pyrethrum, coming from chrysanthemum flowers, and malathion, which have neurotoxic effects and which acted upon the nervous system of the louse. Sadly, for about 15 years, these molecules haven't worked anymore because lice have developed resistance, and it can't be used now because it doesn't kill either lice or their eggs.
Dis, monsieur, tu te grattes la tête. Tu réfléchis ou tu as des poux?
To test lice resistance, Catherine has organised over more than 30 years Olympic competitions where the competitors face each other in contests of speed and against obstacles.
In the 21 products which I've tested over the last few years, there are 2 nowadays which are still efficient, products which have a mechanical effect. They coat and act like a plaster around the louse and stop it from moving, breathing, and having its principal vital functions.
Simply put, it wraps the lice in a kind of glue, non-toxic for humans, and keeps them in place until they die. Like the bedbug, when it comes to sex, the louse is an animal.
A louse has an unrestrained sexuality, because if we think of them in human terms, a male by 30 years of age would have been copulating for one entire year, 24 hours a day, which explains why lice are so numerous and it's so hard to eradicate their descendants.
It's also a super male. On a human scale, an erect penis would be the size of an adult human thigh. It makes you shudder to imagine the sex life of Mr. and Mrs. Louse. In a schoolyard or in the family, lice pass from one head to another with worrying agility. The survival of the species is based on mobility.
Also, everyone has to be treated at once, and there needs to be a World Louse Day. This is hard to do, but in small groups, even a town, this can work reasonably well, and the rate of infestation can be reduced enormously. There are even places where there are no more lice at all.
Lice are exclusively our parasites. If, by mistake, they wander into the fur of a cat, of a dog, or onto a cow, they will die of hunger. What they need is human blood and nothing else. But often, parasites desperate for hemoglobin aren't fussy and will eat anywhere. For ticks and mosquitoes, any blood is good to drink, animal or human. This is extremely dangerous because it establishes links between animals and explains why sometimes we get sick like animals. During the last 150 years, the average temperature has increased by 1 degree Celsius in Europe. Climate epidemiologist Karine Chalvet-Monfray makes forecasts about the development of tick populations that are responsible for many illnesses. She sets up weather stations which are a little special.
This is a classic station with temperature and humidity measured above, but the special thing is here. It's a device to measure the ground temperature below ground cover. Below ground cover means below dead leaves, which is where ticks live, where they take shelter when it's too warm, too dry, or too cold. They don't live in trees, as people sometimes say. They live in the ground cover. And when they hunt, they go onto the leaves and the twigs to await the approach of a host.
Ainsi, le passage d'un hôte.
When an animal or a human approaches, the tick detects them thanks to its CO2 receptors sited at the end of its claws, which serves it for a nose. With its sharp claws, it grips tightly to the victim. To evaluate the spread of ticks according to the temperature, Karin's teams scour the ground. The most efficient capture method is to spread sheets on the ground so the ticks stick to the material.
Là, ça nous en a fait à peu près 5. C'est une valeur.
There we've got about 5, which is quite a good value for the season and the weather. But at other times in the year, they're up to 10 and even, I think, 30 at the height of the season when we're hunting over 10 meters with a sheet. The record here is around 100 ticks, but in a good site at the right time.
This time, it's mainly adults captured, but at other times, it's larvae, transparent and microscopic, recovered in the sheets. In one laying, 2,000 to 3,000 larvae hatch. They're even more hard to detect because at that stage of their development, they're almost invisible to our eyes. The number of ticks collected and the weather data taken at the time of collection are studied to construct mathematical models to predict the abundance of a parasite that public health authorities are taking more and more seriously.
We collect in less than a dozen or so sites, but in a regular monthly fashion. And we also have campaigns where we complete our observations with the army or in other countries, like Holland or Belgium. All this data allows us to better understand the biology and to be able to make forecasts so as to not just know where the ticks are, but when they're active. Here's an example of the type of application which allows us to estimate the risk of tick activity according to a color code. The darker it is, the more risk there is. And these maps are regularly updated according to weather data.
The application extends to other parasites which are doing well, fleas and mosquitoes. Ticks are inactive when the temperature falls under 7 degrees Celsius. But cold days are less and less frequent, and ticks are taking advantage of this.
We're starting to regularly have ticks in winter collections as well as on higher ground, seeing tick populations present where there weren't any beforehand. For example, in the Pyrenees, the Alps. And in the same way, an increase with more and more ticks in the northern latitudes of Sweden and Canada.
Chez nos amis canadiens.
The spread of ticks and invasion of territory which previously had none can be explained by a profound change in our ecosystems. Urban growth has meant that woods and forests are now close to edges of many centres. And wild animals carrying ticks often venture into urban zones.
I'm installing a camera which can film at night using infrared the populations of wild animals which visit these places and can then be correlated with tick populations.
Small rodents are the main hosts of ticks, but many wild species carry them. Wild pigs, deer, bucks and does, more and more of them. And these animals are less and less afraid of man.
Nowadays, our towns are growing at the expense of natural zones. We're getting closer to the last sanctuaries of nature, where wild animals which have parasites and pathogens live. These wild animals come more and more frequently into town, so we've got a mixture which creates real opportunities for invasive species to spread. 50 years ago, there were a lot less ticks and mosquitoes in our towns.
In need of nature, suffocated by pollution, city dwellers all over the world want greener and greener towns. Plantations and stagnant water attract another problem: mosquitoes.
Towns are made for our comfort. We're going to have buildings covered with plants, people will grow flowers at home, we'll water those flowers. It's an inexhaustible source of water, with the possibility that mosquitoes develop in that water. The tiger mosquito, for example, is emblematic of this kind of mosquito behavior. It's a mosquito that at first was wild, developing in little pools of water, and which bit by bit adapted to urban conditions, made them its domain, and since then has spread from town to town. We'll have to learn how to protect ourselves, including in towns where we thought we were safe.
Originally from Asia, the tiger mosquito arrived in Italy in the 90s. Now it is to be found in all the large urban centres in the south of Europe and is moving north following road routes, carried by trucks and private cars returning from holiday. It has been seen beyond the Rhine. The variations in climate that are happening open up to tiger mosquitoes and ticks zones where they were not present. However, both species spread serious illnesses which alarm public authorities. The tiger mosquito carries dengue, chikungunya, and the recently appeared Zika virus. Ticks spread Lyme disease, until now quite rare in Europe, and so little known. Over the last few years, the number of new cases has exploded. The tiger mosquito is diurnal. Its attacks peak at dawn and dusk. The female, once made pregnant, stings to get blood. A healthy victim is contaminated because the mosquito has previously stung a victim with the illness. The virus infects the saliva injected by the mosquito to make the blood more fluid. With the tick, the process is similar. Ticks have an impressive arsenal of tools which let it anchor solidly onto its victim. After that, it injects a powerful anesthetic into the skin and pierces it with the victim knowing nothing about it. Once in place, the tick becomes a sucking pump. After around 8 days of suction, it takes on 100 times its weight in blood.
A lot more ticks are to be seen in the environment, and people frequently get bitten. There are a lot more cases of tick illnesses, especially Lyme disease.
It took 10 years in France for the tiger mosquito to colonize 20 territories, and in just 5 years, it has taken 10 more. This is clearly a biological invasion we're seeing.
How do we get rid of these parasites, even more dangerous because of their stealth? Vaccines against illnesses transmitted by ticks and mosquitoes are slow to be developed, and years go by before they arrive on the market.
Des claques sur vos cuisses, des claques sur vos bras. Super Timor est là. Super Timor est encore plus fort avec sa nouvelle formule.
Tête peut nourrir plus d'un coup.
Like the louse, the other bloodsuckers are becoming more and more resistant to the chemicals used to destroy them.
In a recent study, it was found that in some regions it took 500 times more insecticide to kill mosquitoes. By using insecticides massively and without control, the selection of resistance is favoured. Most mosquitoes will die, but some will resist and survive, and those will give birth to a following generation, which is a little more resistant to insecticides and so forth. We're creating generations of mosquitoes which are more and more resistant.
Invasion de moustiques! Envoyez l'aérosol! Ils reviendront toujours.